Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second NFT Subgraph Community Call. So we had a really great call last week where we went over all of the different things that people are building around NFTs. We did a subgraph showcase, which is really cool to see things from Foundation, Rarible, Known Origin, a bunch of others. And we came away with a bunch of suggestions for things that we can add to like tooling to make building NFT subgraphs easier. We started discussing some areas for standardization with different NFT subgraphs. And this week we want to start organizing some of this different work and finding owners so we can drive towards improving the landscape for NFT subgraphs. So I'm going to share my screen and we can take a look at a way that we can start organizing this work. So I've got this subgraphs table where we can track NFT subgraphs that we want to have built, different types for those subgraphs, their status, the complexity, low, moderate, high, and an owner that we could assign for them. Then we might want to track different kind of improvements that we want to make to existing subgraphs. The standards, these are the ones that we discussed on the last call. So these might be like, entity types or interfaces. Is this easy enough for people to read? Great. These are the ones that were mentioned last week. So like creator, marketplace, collection, multiple owners, metadata, fee standard, and events. And then we discussed like tooling. Most of these would be things, I guess, on the Edge and Node teams plate for things that we can improve in the infrastructure. So the big ones that were raised last week, one was the missing IPFS metadata. And this is basically a problem with when you're syncing a subgraph, if at the time that a handler is called, a given IPFS file isn't available, then it'll just time out and keep going, and there's no like callback mechanism in case then the file becomes available at a later date. So that kind of results in some missing data. So this is an improvement we can make on the infrastructure side. Subgraph composition solves a bunch of problems for being able to kind of aggregate and combine these different NFT subgraphs into more aggregated subgraphs. And it also helps with the syncing times because, if you try to have a giant subgraph that's indexing everything, and then you want to change one thing, you've got to resync everything, and that can be a slow process. So if you have composition, you change something in one subgraph, that's the only thing that needs to sync. And then you've got kind of the updated subgraph with everything in it. And then, we discussed kind of multi-blockchain and being able to kind of aggregate data across different chains. And so these are things kind of on the tooling / infrastructure side that I think, the Edge and Node team will be able to, help with. But for the call today, I think we can start to look at some of these subgraphs, if there's like improvements we want to be making to subgraphs, and around these standards to maybe get a little bit more color and start to maybe assign people that want to help shepherd some of these things through. If any of these are things that like require resources that folks don't already have, they'd be great candidates for foundation grants, and those are things that we can try to maybe scope out. And, if people already, would like to work on these things themselves, then that's something they could do directly. Or, if it's something where, let's say there's someone who has knowledge of what would be useful for the community, here's a particular improvement that would be valuable to everybody. I can provide input on how it should work, but maybe say you don't have the resources to actually do it yourself, then we can also try to find a dev shop, and we've got several partners that we work with that can help with the development. How does that sound as a kind of agenda for today? Cool. So why don't we start on the subgraph page itself? So I think you all should have received invites to this Airtable, so you might be able to actually accept the invite, and we could even do some kind of live editing of these tables. But are there any kind of, on the last call, I think people mentioned that there were like, 10 or so NFT subgraphs that were already, good on the graph. Here we've got the different statuses for like, we could kind of rename these, but the basic thinking here is that sometimes people will deploy subgraphs that are in a pretty basic state. And so maybe they're not fully usable for, production applications. And so this is a way to kind of track whether it's just kind of basic at this point, or whether it's basically got like everything that you need to really build a great production application around it. Do people have kind of off the top of their heads subgraphs that either they know already exist, or they think should exist?
We've got a Nifty Inc. subgraph.
NFT Inc. Is that one word?
Nifty, NIFTY.
FTA. Sorry, one more time.
NIFTY. Which is, I mean, that's complete.
Awesome. So there's these Hadrian, the 721-1155 ones. Which contracts are these for? All. So you're already indexing all of them?
Yes, and I'm going to add the WigaWag also to the list.
It'd be nice to maybe in like the notes you could add like which ones are all, like roughly how many different ones would that be? Yeah, so that's already impressive if that's the case. I see someone added POAP, right? The proof of what does the AP stand for?
Proof of attendance protocol.
Yes, exactly. So that's a cool one for when people go to different conferences to kind of show that they were there in person.
Do the NFTs, which are minted by Mir for the blog posts, is that captured in any subgraphs today?
Yeah, they're minted on Zora, so they're included in the Zora subgraph.
Awesome,
Nice.
Thanks.
I recently saw a very cool one for hash masks.
Hash masks. That's already on the hosted service?
Yes. I'm not affiliated with it, but it looked fairly complete.
Cool. Yeah, last week we did the showcase, so people had a chance to kind of chat about their subgraphs. Breck, I don't think you were on the call last week. Would you maybe want to just share a bit about maybe what Zora's building, what's like captured in the subgraph already?
Sure. Yeah. So for those of you who are not familiar with the project, Zora is an extension of the ERC 721 standard to move the market mechanism into the actual ERC 721 itself. And so whenever you mint a new token using Zora, you actually are minting as well a market mechanism. And the owner of an existing Zora token also is in full charge and has ownership of the sell side of the liquidity of the market. And so anyone can place a bid, and then the owner can accept and ask. We've also pushed down like royalties and stuff like that also down to the contract level, so it doesn't exist on individual marketplaces, and it's like it's coded into the blockchain as well. And then our subgraph just like indexes all the data that's required. So like the main entities are like media, which is essentially just our ERC 721s, and then bid activity, ask activity, transfers, things like that. So all the basic data that you would need to be able to interact with Zora in like a Web2 context all exists within our subgraph.
Awesome, yeah, and it's been really cool to see just the adoption of Zora, and I wonder how that kind of plays to some of the standards that were kind of brought up. When we were discussing standards in last week's call, I think some of these are kind of on-chain standards, right? Like almost EIPs or not, or sorry, ERCs or something. And then some of them are at the data layer that would allow for a better type of composition of subgraphs. So you mentioned it was kind of an extension of 721. Here for the different types, I put ERC 721, 1155, and like marketplace. Does that feel right to you guys, or how would you think about the different like types of contracts or things that would be getting indexed?
So I guess a distinction I'd make between the subgraphs is the ones which have sort of been built to support an application on a given contract versus the sort of the wiggle-wag, and those are the ones which are more like sort of directories of anything. So say the Nifty Inc. one is super specific to some of the needs of essentially a front end, versus like and has some like peculiarities. So like it has its own royalties type system and sort of marketplace built in, which are like not necessarily part of the ERC 721 standard. And so I guess it's that challenge where some of these could be composed into like a larger directory, whereas you've also got the directory ones, which are just going to be missing a load of the like specific logic per contract. So I don't know if that distinction makes sense to other people.
Yeah, I guess the way that I was thinking about this is that we'd want to start with these kind of smaller, more granular subgraphs, and then kind of like compose them into the larger ones. And I guess because we don't have full subgraph composition yet, people have kind of jumped straight to those larger ones in some cases. But maybe the ideal architecture is to have individual subgraphs for all those pieces, and then have like what you're describing, which it would be its own type of subgraph as well, for sure. That's kind of like an aggregation, or we could think of a good name for that. Is that different from like a marketplace? Because I mean, I guess the marketplace is still a type of contract, right? And I'm going to be showing my ignorance here, but are the marketplace contracts generally distinct from kind of like the token contracts?
Yeah, so
CryptoPunks.
I was just going to say, like, an example is like Foundation. Right now, those are separate contracts, and we index both in one subgraph. But I think the future actually probably looks more like everybody has a standardized way of like indexing their 721 or 1155, and then you could index your marketplace however you want as like an additional layer. That way, like, there's more interoperability, right?
Yeah, for sure. So this looks right then right now to basically say Foundation is a ERC 721 and marketplace.
Yeah, and we index both and it's one subgraph, but that in the world where there's a composition, I think that actually should be split out, and then everybody probably would be doing the same thing. Like if you have your own marketplace, but then you have your own like NFT, like you should split that out so there's separation of concern and people can interop at different layers.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, because it does feel like you can easily bucket like most of these contracts are at a base layer, ERC 721 or ERC 1155. And if we can come up with a standard for defining a subgraph for those two ERCs, then we have a base layer of composability at the subgraph layer, and then you can build your own marketplace logic and work on a marketplace standard as well.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like a good goal. So Breck, you mentioned for Zora, it's kind of an extension of the 721. I mean, would you call like the type then like Zora, or do you guys have a name that you're looking to for that standard?
I think it's fair. Like, it's logically an extension of it. So like ERC 721 would be sufficient. I don't know if it needs a new name. I don't know.
I guess if there's additional functionality that you guys are bringing with that at
Yes.
least then you know that, hey, this is another Zora kind of like instance or something, then you'd be able to benefit from that additional functionality.
Yeah, I mean, we've been calling it ZNFTs, but I think we should definitely also include ERC 721 in there as well, so people at least know that it's not like fully different, right?
Sure. So yeah,
Cool.
ZNFT.
Yeah, that works.
So then Zora would have kind of ERC 721, ZNFT, and also like a marketplace.
Yeah, sure.
Thinking out loud, that actually makes it a lot easier then for others to build on the ZNFT protocol, because then they don't have to query your marketplace subgraph. They just query your tokens and maybe build something else on top.
Yeah, totally.
Are the known origin guys here? Is anyone familiar with their subgraph? Because it's probably something like this, and I would imagine also marketplace. And then something like a CryptoKitties or CryptoPunks, they don't really have a marketplace, right? So it's just kind of like the tokens that they've minted.
It's interesting because it's not an exact ERC 721 on the base contract, but they do have an auction within that original contract. They were one of the first to put that in place.
Yeah.
But then there's also a wrapped punks contract that'll convert it to a 721. But then you also have a lot of sales happening on like OpenSea. So it's one of these cases where you might want to either shard OpenSea as a provider of purchase history, or you want to import those contracts into the CryptoPunk subgraph to have the purchases associated with the punks.
Okay, yeah. So how would you represent that, I guess, if we're trying to track it like this?
It's kind of across the board.
Yeah.
It's 721 marketplace and non-standard.
Yeah. Do we think that that's just because, you know, they were earlier on and that people are doing a better job of standardizing now? Or, you know, is your sense that people are going to continue to do these kind of like non-standard things?
I believe it was actually pre-721.
Oh, wow. Okay. So maybe that should be the type, is kind of like, well, I guess we could just call it non-standard, but you know, it is interesting that it's pre-721. Well, interesting that hasn't affected their values. So CryptoKitties is 721 though, right? They were like the first, or even this.
I'm not entirely sure. I'm checking. I think their transfer function is a bit different.
That's another one where you can get like wrapped CryptoKitties if you want to follow it like 1-to-1 against a 721. But again, it's like
sure
another
the wrap
contract.
is not for, I think it's the wrap kitties for ERC20 actually.
Oh, good call.
Should these wrapped ones be types that are tracked? So we can leave it like that. So yeah, I mean, if we had to guess, how many different of these types of, tokens and marketplaces do we think there are? I guess that was the question for Hadrian, which here, holy crap, so you're saying there's, oh, no, yeah, all 721 registries. So there's over 5,000 registries?
Yes, when I'm trying to list them on Subgraph, the skip function cannot go over 5,000. So I don't know how many there are.
Oh, wow. Okay. So yeah, quite a large number. And how did you find all of those?
So basically what the subgraph, what it does is it's looking for the ERC721 events. And whenever it sees an ERC721 event, it knows the contract is sender. And so basically it's added as an entity in the subgraphs. And then we also add entities for the token, and they are attached to the token registry. But both for my subgraphs and one on subgraph, there is like a token contract or a token registry entity in these subgraphs that lists all the compatible contracts, and you can get all the tokens for each one of these entities.
Wow, that's super interesting. So that's like literally all of the contracts on the chain that kind of conform.
Yeah, actually
there is one thing here is that the signature for the transfer event of ERC721 and ERC20 conflict. So
Right.
It's pretty difficult to distinguish between the two. There are solutions, but I wouldn't bet that we are getting exactly the right ones. For 1155, since there is a clear separation, this is easier to see.
Yes.
Also, there is the issue that ERC721 allow token to be minted without event. And actually, CryptoKitties have such a token. So if they are never transferred, they basically don't exist from the point of view of the subgraph. I don't think it's an issue in practice, but this is something to consider.
Yeah, that is interesting. And you know, subgraphs support call handlers. So if you know that that's the case for a specific subgraph, then you can use call handlers and you know, find the constructor or whatever kind of thing like that to trigger on instead of the events.
The thing is, these subgraphs are already very, very slow to sync. So
Right.
we try to avoid call handlers. Means they degrade the performance of indexing by a very large factor.
Yeah, which I was actually going to add that as another tooling thing is, I guess, indexing performance. And there's a bunch of things we're going to be looking at here just to increase performance beyond just the composition use case.
Just for the record, on the EIP 721 subgraph that I built between the contracts, the tokens, the registries, and all the transfer events, there is over 46 million entries in the subgraph already.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's massive. So, you know, for most people, you know, is it, how helpful is it to have a subgraph that kind of dynamically picks up all of the 721s based on kind of the contract signatures versus, I guess, kind of having a curated list of 721s? Like, how do people think about how these things should be aggregated?
I would like to jump on that one. So me, actually, when I created the EIP 721, I wanted to have an API for every token and not be rely on, for example, on OpenSea. But this was also something I wanted as a developer. So actually, my subgraph is also an NPM package that you can install, and you have your subgraph while you develop. So when you create a new NFT project, you don't even need to write a subgraph for it while you develop. So you have a local developer experience where you have your graph node with that you can query and then build your app around that. So this is also an aspect, I guess. It's not really the aspect we are discussing here to have a generic one, but I found it interesting to mention as a dev tool, basically, on top of being a way to get all the token in existence.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, so I would imagine that most marketplaces or, you know, dApps that are kind of aggregating these things would want to be able to somewhat choose. Do we think that that's right? And that kind of, you know, each one, you know, is, you know, would want to include a different set of NFTs that they're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I mean, there is also the issue of like curation, because you can't by having this graph generic. I love it in local development, but then when you build an app, you have lots of issues. So that's why, for example, I was building a marketplace, and the choice, the plan was to use Subgraph, but then we had issue with metadata, like some of the token image were not existing. And I was comparing this with OpenSea. In OpenSea, they had the data. I don't know where it came from. I think a lot of projects are collaborating with OpenSea, for example, and so they can provide something which is not even available on chain or even in the metadata, it seems. So considering all of that, generic subgraph, to me, it's a goal that we should reach to, but in practice, it's not that easy.
Yeah, I think for like generic subgraph, the users of those subgraph need to do a curation by themselves, and sometimes it is needed, right? If you don't have like a good like subgraph for some like maybe rare NFTs, like the only way you can go is to use the generic one, right? But in case of like the other one, curation already done on the subgraph level, maybe for some use cases it is easier to plug in already curated subgraph maybe. And also I need to add that like on curated subgraph you potentially have more data available, because like sometimes you need to parse data like specifically in a specific manner to each of those NFTs. So that's another difference.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right, so here I think we can keep this going as just a list of subgraphs that either exist or that people would want to have created. And I think it'd be really helpful maybe if after the call, if now you've all been invited to this Airtable, and this is a table that we can try to keep up to date to basically track building of different subgraphs. I created this table because I kind of assumed that there would be improvements that we want to make to existing subgraphs. Is there anything like that that comes to mind for things that features that would be nice to have in subgraphs that just aren't there yet?
Maybe it will be better to start with the features that are already presented in this current subgraphs, so we can see what is missing and what is already implemented there.
Yeah, I mean, generally for tracking this kind of stuff, would it be useful to kind of have like the different entities? Is that like a good way to kind of track to see what features are implemented? I mean, at the end of the day, I guess, it comes down to the complete schema. So, the way I think about it is that, a subgraph has different dimensions of completeness and we could say like accuracy. So, you want all of the data to be accurate. If there's something like, there's metadata that's just missing, you could, I think, consider that a type of inaccuracy in the data. And then there's like completeness, which basically comes down to the schema of what fields are being populated for the different entities. So I mean, we could take a look at them one by one, but I guess in general, the way that I would track improvements or new feature development would be in terms of new entity types that can be added, new fields that could be added to existing entity types, or maybe like improving like the accuracy of something that maybe isn't as high quality as it could be.
Yeah, I mean, we have a good example with my subgraph and Adrian subgraph. Mine is like minimal, and Adrian subgraph is, I think, almost complete, right? It's almost like if you, I mean, considering only ERC 721, it seems it covers everything.
Cool. Hadrian, do you maybe want to share your screen, and you can, I know you did a demo last week, but maybe we could take a look just to kind of see in a little more detail what that schema looks like.
Yeah. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so this is the subgraph, and just like we discussed previously, like the higher level is what I call token registries, and here you have a list of a lot of addresses that are all addresses of token registries, and you can get their name and their symbol, but you can also get the list of tokens that they hold. And I'm going to show it here because it will be simpler. Like you have a list of all tokens, and obviously from all tokens, you can go back to the registry. They are identified by an integer, obviously, and they have an owner. And when you go back to the owner, you can obviously get a list of all the tokens, and this will be all the tokens across all the possible registries. So, and again, that's what I try to call deep linking subgraph, is that I want all entities to be linked to all entities. And so the core entities are token registry, token, and accounts, which are like the basic components. And then the idea is that I try to have a view of all the events that are happening within this context. And like if you go to a token, you will see all the transfer and all the, okay, this is wrong. I should check that out, how it will belong to everything. But okay, like all the transfer, you can see how the transfer happened. So if you were to take, let's go and take the very first token. Okay, we've got the registry that it's attached to. We also got its identifier. You see that its ID is basically the concatenation of both. And you've got its owner, which again is an object. So you can get like its ID. Yeah, I will remove this one for clarity. And then you can see all the transfer events. And so here we see we've got two transfer events. And so we can see from and to. So basically there is this from 0 to this address. So this is the mint, and then there has been one transfer already. And when you have a look at the transfer, it goes deeper than that. You can get the transaction ID if you ever want to go on Etherscan and see the transaction. So yeah, this is, and basically this transfer is an event, and I've got event is like an abstract interface. And from that, you get the ID, obviously, of the transaction, but you get the block number, the timestamp. From a transaction, you can see all the other events that are attached to the same transaction. Again, deep linking, and you've got timestamps. So you can sort the transfers, and that was my approach of being unopinionated about what is the actual owner of what is the actual artist or creator of a contract. Since I've got this transfer history that's stored into the subgraph, and I can sort it by timestamp if I want. This helped me go back to basically anything that is part of the standard. So if ever an ERC 721 is a bit modified and there is non-standard features to manage fees built into the contract for artists or stuff like that, I will not capture it, but basically anything that is part of the standard should be captured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's quite a few entities here that I guess weren't in our list of things to standardize on. Would you mind stopping to share, I guess?
Yeah.
So here we've got like the transfers accounts. If we go back to, the list that we had, and maybe people can look at their own subgraphs and see if there's, things that they would add. Are any of those entities like the transfers or things like that, things that people think would be worth standardizing on?
I guess, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I guess if a contract is ERC 721 compliant, then we sort of get these standard, get all of those standards out of the box. So everything, those should also automatically be standardized. Whereas I think the things here are things where Nifty, we've implemented our own like marketplace on our own like fee standard, and like it sounds like Zora have done the same. And so it's more that like whereas you could just look at the events that all ERC 721s emit and get the ones like these are the ones where I guess we need to create standardization because we get the other ones for free on chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Cool. Then let's start here and
real quick on that. I agree on the contract is already standardized. I do think it's probably like two that I do like on here are like transfer and approval, just making it clear and explicit that like on subgraphs we should include those for the 721. I think that'd be valuable rather than just rely on people to say, hey, on the contracts it's standardized. On the subgraph, some might have it and some might not. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so for that example, were you thinking of transfers specifically or what entity type?
The 2 I saw in there that I liked was transfer and approval.
So one philosophical question I have is, does it make sense to create entities based off of events? I think for transfers it does, but rather does it make sense to maybe make a user or like an account an entity and then keep track of the current approved user for that, or the current approved account for that account, rather than like all of the approvals that happen over time. This is something that I rabbled with or was wrangling with when I was building the Zora subgraph. Is like logically it makes sense to index based off of events, but also it makes sense to like have the subgraph just be like in sync with the state of whatever the contract storage is. And I wasn't sure where people would sat on that. So like for us, we track approvals, but it's on the user entity. So we don't have like an approval entity itself.
I think
My
that's a
point
good
of view would be that if you can have both, then why not?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think transfer maybe less so just because you can get the owner pretty easily, but then like for approvals, you could probably index both the event and the current state. So you have basically like current approval, and then there's like the approval event, or we can call it something else. But essentially, you can get both.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then here, last time someone talked about events for which like I guess the transfer was just one of the events. So I guess that's another thing here is it better to just have a generic events kind of thing of which maybe events is like an interface, and then there are these different types of events that kind of implement the interface, and that's a way of being able to get a single feed of events with different types, but each type I guess has specific fields to it. So that could be a route. So let's kind of go through these, one by one then. And I think, so for the standardization, I think what would be helpful here is, I guess, a survey of the different subgraphs and kind of how they've implemented similar concepts, and then maybe trying to come up with a proposal for what an ideal schema would look like for these things. And then maybe at the next call, we could present that and, kind of with the pros and cons to different approaches. And then we could kind of have a discussion for each one. And maybe that could help with the standardization process. So let's kind of find owners for each of these. And then the owner can kind of take that as homework to do the survey and then come up with a proposal for discussion. So let's start with the creator. Who could maybe just describe a bit about what they think this creator should roughly be encompassing?
I think someone's just asked a sort of good question in the chat around creators versus artists, but I guess that's kind of that's getting to the meat of the question here, right? I guess.
Yeah, right. This shouldn't assume that we know what the thing should be called in the first place. That could be one of the proposals is to change the name.
Naming is one of the toughest problems in engineering. So we'll have to figure this out.
Yeah.
Is that metadata?
I think it should be a first class. I feel very strongly that it should be a first class citizen on the contract itself and on the subgraph. It's like, actually, arguably, it's the most important information. And leaving it up to metadata where that can be tampered with or it can be not provable cryptographically, I think is not optimal. And that's something that we felt very strongly about, at least at Zora.
Yeah, in EIP 1155, like there is a standard field of the creator of the NFT, and in many of ERC 721 platforms, they also have their own, let's say, like fields like named differently for the creator. But I'm not sure if they mean the same notion. Like, is it the creator, the kind of technical address, or it's the real address of the artist or something else? Yeah, it should be investigated.
Yeah, I guess it's not really a field on the ERC 721 standard, right? The assumption would have to be that whatever the minting address is the creator, which could be potentially problematic, I guess. Is that the point of contention for most folks?
But actually, in many of EAP 721, they have their own, like, each platform that utilize the standard. Almost every platform has the notion of creator on the smart contract level. It's just not standardized field.
Yeah, big plus one on like this being, I think, probably the most important field as like NFTs have evolved. And then right now, I think it is different on almost everybody. Like Foundation, we basically looked at what people have out there, and we saw like Spura use token creator singular as like the field, and we just adopted that. But just like everybody has a different field, so I would say we have to standardize on the contract, and then we should definitely standardize on the subgraph. We just have to pick one. We just have to pick one name, and everybody just has to agree on it. That's it. But I also know that's the hard part.
Yeah. So who wants to take this as kind of homework for the week?
Yeah, I can take this.
Awesome. You're going to need to accept the Airtable invite so I can sign you. All right. What about Marketplace?
This is where it gets spicy because all markets have different interfaces. And I don't know if there is a single interface for how a market mechanism looks for NFTs.
Yeah, and that could be the case, or maybe there's like different types or something. But I think that would be interesting for somebody to think about. What are the commonalities, and is there something where there should be standardization, or is it literally every marketplace is different? Which I think would be a fine result if that's the case. And then it's kind of up to aggregation subgraphs to decide maybe like what are the metrics or things that are interesting to track across marketplaces, but maybe kind of the raw data is just different.
Yeah, I'm happy to do a little bit of a dive into this.
Cool.
I guess the like the atomic unit there, like, is the sale almost the sale of the thing, and then there's loads of interesting potential capacity on like how the sale came to be.
I think the most basic primitive is going to be like the sale, and then like who sold it, who bought it, and then the currency and the amount. If we start with that at the marketplace level, I think like we'll have something to build off of.
Can you repeat that? Sale, currency,
amount, and then seller and buyer.
Yeah, it gets spicy because we have more than just a seller and a buyer. We have this notion of like the previous owner. But yeah, we can. I mean, this is an interesting problem.
And I think with standardization, if these things are like interfaces, then it doesn't mean that you have to be limited to the interfaces, right? It means that like at a minimum, these things are shared, and then there can be additional fields.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, maybe I'll change the type here because not everybody's accepted the Airtable invite. So I don't think I can put you as a collaborator, but I'm just gonna for now say single line text.
Yeah, I actually didn't see an invite in my email.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't see one either.
Yes.
Okay, I probably screwed that up then, so I'll do it after the call. Okay, so we've got Breck for marketplace and Alpizo for creator. What about collections?
What was this one?
So is this the sense that of
Oh, like each contract, like right now, the way that wallets treat each contract as a collection. Is that...
No, I assume that this is referring to a collection of NFTs. Like if I don't
Perhaps
know.
editions, maybe like 1155 editions. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we could take a look at the recording from last week to see what was meant when this was proposed. Yeah, it could be additions or it could be kind of groupings for like curation purposes. Okay, we could leave this one out. Multiple owners.
If I remember, that was specifically for 1155. So probably one of the 1155 teams can take this.
Yeah, I mean, like on the cryptogram media subgraph, we made some kind of simple standard for how we track the ownership of both like semi-fungible and non-fungible tokens. So yeah, we can, yeah, maybe, yeah, maybe we can see if it's good enough. We can just use this for the time being.
Okay, yeah, I'll assign this to you then if you could propose something for next week. All right, metadata. I guess this is a big one. And I mean,
This is like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. I would imagine that we would want to take something like the metadata that's on the NFT and parse it into something that's more semantically meaningful in the subgraph schema, as opposed to even having like a metadata, entity on the subgraph or entity. Does that sound reasonable?
I would actually, Sam's not here, but Sam Mason declare he's been building a lot of tools for a bunch of NFTs. I think he actually has like pretty good ideas on how to like standardize the metadata because he built the NFTE, the embed tool, and he's just seen a lot of shit.
What's the last name?
Let me link you his. I'll add him to the Telegram group.
He's Sam Deck on Twitter.
Yeah.
The interesting problem about metadata is that no schema or standardization is enforceable at the contract layer. So if we get too strict on any fields that we would want to index across all NFTs, like things will break quickly. I'm wondering if it's maybe possible to add like a JSON blob object in the like as a scalar type, so you could just shove the raw like JSON, if it is JSON from IPFS or wherever it's stored. That way, like you could have some higher level service that's consuming stuff from a subgraph to be able to parse the JSON and have it actually live in an index query layer versus having to wait on IPFS to pull it, which is like, yeah, I think kind of the standard.
You could, but I guess the idea is like the subgraph is a good place for that logic to live, right? So you can still kind of like switch on all of the different types to know like what type of NFT is this, and then do that parsing in the subgraph handler.
Yeah, I guess like the nature of this is it's always going to be a load of optional fields. But I guess the thing would be to start to define what those might be, or at least to inherit the OpenSea type standards. Like at least from my experience, the challenge here has been more like the IPFS stuff stops this actually making it into the subgraph because we can't reliably get it in time. So this currently isn't even a problem at the subgraph level.
Okay, so we've got this one here with the missing IPFS metadata. So if we can solve that, then I guess we'll start seeing a lot more wonky metadata, and then we can figure out how to make sense of it.
Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to run into problems quickly if we're like actually trying to parse it within the context of a handler, just with like the constraints of WebAssembly, or I can't even remember assembly script. I was just like, there's not going to be, I don't know. This is something that I felt pain points with, is like there's not a ton of, you can't bring TypeScript libraries into assembly script. You have to use assembly script libraries, and that means that any sort of parsing and stuff that you would want to do is just difficult to do within the context of the handler.
Well, this sounds like a place where we can make some tooling improvements. So
Yeah.
should we say like kind of
Totally.
JSON parsing or something could be something for us to track? You know, we can say like for metadata, because if people are, you know, feeling pain with some of these things, you know, would be worth filing issues, and we can see how we can improve the functionality of what you can do with assembly script.
I have 2 quick points I want to make before I actually gotta hop off soon. But
yeah.
One is, Breck, I actually really like the way you guys did your metadata standard for Zora. Actually, an interesting thing we could do here is just like you self-reflect, right? Like you have something on the metadata, it tells you what like version or what parser it should really be using. And then like that logic could be part of like the indexing, right? So like you know what the versioning is, and then you could pull in the code to properly parse that. And then we got to figure out like at what level the entity has to be like standardized and works across the board. But I think that could be at least a start in terms of how we think about this. And second point, just because I got hot, is the fee standard. I just want to be clear, at least from my perspective, I think the most important one is the creator fee on the NFT. Because marketplaces can have their own fees, but like we can offload that. Everybody will do that somewhat differently. But the fee standard that I was talking about in the last call is just like, what does the creator get as a royalty on all subsequent sales? And that should be self-reported and honored.
And who wants to take this one?
I could take that too, but I got hot. Peace,
okay,
guys.
Perfect. Hey, thank you so much, Alpizo. And yeah, thanks everyone for making the second NFT Subgraph call. I feel like this was a really productive part of the conversation here. So I think helping to align on standards, and then you know, we'll do the work on our side to help with the tooling. And if anything comes up for new subgraphs or improvements to subgraphs during the week, you now have access to the Airtable, and we can keep this up to date and get all of these work streams done through to completion. So thank you so much for joining. It was really great to have everybody have a great week.
Yaniv, thank you so much for hosting. This is awesome.
Cheers, everyone.